What makes this protagonist special is that, no matter how many times he dies, he always comes back to life. It has happened so many times that he doesn't even feel surprised anymore. With every new chance, he is reborn into a different world. Some of those worlds were set in the distant past, in ancient times, while others existed in far-off futures, where humanity had already mastered space itself. This time, he died fighting a monster and, once again, was reborn, now as a baby. But since he has been through this cycle countless times before, he knows exactly how to act. He is practically an expert when it comes to reincarnation. Now, let's see what he will do in this new life. He starts by observing the place where he is. Judging by the furniture and the decoration of the room, he quickly realizes that this must be a world similar to the Middle Ages, and with all the experience he has accumulated, it's easy for him to tell that this place is not Earth. That leads him to believe he might be in a fantasy world. Even though he prefers technological worlds, which are cleaner and more advanced, he is still happy that he wasn't born into a poor family this time. The fact that there are maids in the house shows that his new family seems to be fairly well off. And to top it all off, he is also glad that his new mother is so beautiful. Even though he doesn't understand the language she speaks, he can feel her affection. The way she holds him carefully, afraid of dropping him, and the tenderness in her eyes make it clear that she truly loves him. And that alone already means something very special. In his other lives, he had all kinds of mothers. Some were loving, others abandoned him shortly after birth, and some even exploited him as cheap labor. But now, he feels that things will be different. When a maid enters the room and asks to hold the baby, calling him a prince, he is taken by surprise. He never imagined that he would be reborn as part of royalty. Even so, something catches his attention. His mother, Lady Rafana, doesn't look happy. She tells the maid, whose name is Xena, that people might not consider this child a true prince. Rafana used to be just a servant herself, just like Xena, and because of that, she believes her son will never be accepted by the nobles. She says that they only call him a prince because he carries the king's blood. But since he was born to a common woman, the others already reject him. She knows he will never have the right to inherit the throne or any real power. Seeing his mother so sad, the baby reaches out with his tiny hand and tries to wipe away her tears. This deeply moves Rafana. To her, that small gesture means everything. The maid, on the other hand, thinks he was just moving by coincidence. But we know that his name in this life is Errol, and yes, he was truly trying to comfort his mother. Errol doesn't care about not having the right to the throne. In fact, he prefers it that way. It means that the powerful nobles won't pay attention to him, which leaves him free to live however he wants. To him, that's perfect. He plans to live a peaceful life, without getting involved in the problems of the royal family. And deep down, he feels that this life is going to be far better than all the others. Rafana looks at her son and wishes she could keep him happy like this forever, but she knows it won't be easy. Errol, hearing the word power while half asleep, ends up waking up and starts sucking his thumb like any normal baby. But inside, he is thinking, in a world where everything revolves around status and origin, being a prince with no chance to inherit anything is like being a pawn on a chessboard. He has no influence, no backing, and no guaranteed future. People will try to use him and then discard him, but he isn't worried. He knows he can change all of that with the abilities he has accumulated throughout his past lives. 3 months pass. Rafana watches her son sleeping and thinks about how much he looks like an angel. She runs her hand through his hair and wishes it looked more like the king's. Soon after, Xena comes in, saying that the carriage is ready. Rafana kisses her son on the cheek and tells him to behave, then leaves the room. As soon as the door closes, Errol opens his eyes. He wasn't sleeping at all. He was just pretending. He lets out a small giggle and quickly covers his mouth so he won't draw Xena's attention. He knows that being cute is hard work, especially when everyone is watching him all the time. But now it's time to act. He sits up in the crib, ready to do something no baby should ever do, begin his plan to gain power. He understands that, in any world, one thing never changes. Those with strength are the ones in control, and if he becomes strong enough, no one will dare lay a hand on him. As he begins training, Errol reflects on all the lives he has already lived and realizes that he never wasted a single one of them. One of his greatest achievements was creating a technique that allows him to train even while being a baby. This technique is called Taeyong Origin Creation, and he invented it during his 30th reincarnation. It is a true masterpiece of a technique, one that allows Errol to develop both natural chi and origin chi at the same time. What's even more incredible is that no one around him can tell that he is training at all. He does some quick mental calculations and realizes that, if he keeps this up, by the time he turns 10, he will have the internal energy of a 60-year-old man and by 20, it will be as if he had accumulated 180 years worth of power. Once he gets past the early stages, he won't even need to focus that hard anymore. He could train even while being held in Xena's arms. To speed up his progress, he sends his energy through his body to stimulate his nerves, concentrating everything in his brain, especially in the frontal lobe. The heat from the process starts to spread, and he begins sweating heavily. The pain is so intense that it feels like his body might pass out at any moment. Errol lets out a brief cry and struggles to regain control. Outside the room, Xena hears the noise and rushes in. By the time she enters, Errol is already pretending to sleep in the crib, completely still. She suspects that maybe he just wet himself, so she leans in to check. Inside, Errol panics, knowing that any touch could ruin all the effort he just put in. But luckily, she doesn't notice anything unusual, comments that he probably just had a nightmare, and leaves the room. Errol's body is still overheated, like a blazing furnace. He can feel energy leaking out in every direction and has to concentrate hard just to avoid passing out. Even with his entire body aching, he refuses to stop. He wants to be strong enough to never rely on anyone again, even if he has to risk everything to get there. Using the origin creation technique, he is determined to become someone with real power, someone who will live life on his own terms. When he finally manages to calm down, another cry escapes his mouth, loud enough for Xena to hear from outside. She rushes back, thinking something serious happened. When she reaches the room, she finds Errol sweating, but lying down as if he were sleeping peacefully. She decides that he needs extra care and goes to prepare a bath with herbs. As soon as she leaves, Errol excitedly hops up in the crib, celebrating the fact that everything went according to plan. When Xena returns, she picks him up and praises him for being such a strong baby. He just smiles, relieved that she didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Thanks to the technique he created, Errol's body absorbs energy constantly, even while he is eating or sleeping. He knows that in just 3 years, he will be stronger than most adults, and by the time he turns 10, no one will be able to match him. Just imagining that future fills him with excitement. As Xena holds him in her arms, she hears a noise coming from the ceiling, but she gets distracted by Errol's smiling little face. Errol, meanwhile, continues dreaming of the day he will be strong, respected, and living like a true king. Only 5 months have passed since Errol's birth, but because of his mana absorption technique, his strength and energy are already far above those of other babies. He can crawl on his own now and keeps pushing himself every single day, knowing that it won't be long before he leaves everyone else behind. During one of his training sessions on the mat, Lady Rafana appears and lifts him off the floor. She brings him an unexpected toy, and for a moment, Errol's eyes lock onto the gift. Noticing her anticipation, he starts playing with it, pretending to have fun. Deep down, he feels a bit embarrassed, but he doesn't want to disappoint her. Rafana and Xena start laughing when they see how happy he looks, commenting on how handsome and perfect he is. Errol enjoys the praise, even though he knows most of that beauty came from his mother's looks. Still, he decides to cherish these moments of childhood, knowing they won't last forever. Suddenly, he begins to show signs of discomfort. Xena tries to figure out what he wants, but she doesn't get it right at first. In reality, Errol is just hungry. He starts crying, making it very clear. Finally, Xena understands and gives him milk. While he feeds, the adults begin talking about money. They say that the household's resources are almost gone, which is strange for a royal family. They mention that even though Errol needs to eat like a prince, the money just isn't enough. The mansion's budget was cut, and even raising a single child has become a challenge. Errol had already overheard similar conversations from the maids before. They said that Lady Rafana would have to eat less so there would be enough food for everyone else. And if she didn't do that, no one would survive the next season. Errol can hardly believe what he's hearing and thinks it has to be a joke. But his mother, despite all of this, keeps smiling and says she doesn't care if she doesn't survive, as long as everyone else is fine. Hearing that makes Errol furious. How can they treat his mother like this? Just because she isn't an important noble? Even after giving birth to a prince, she and her son still receive no support at all. This isn't right, and one thing is already clear to him. He's going to change this fate. Errol starts to understand why his mother is always leaving by carriage. She's trying to meet the king, but she never succeeds. He finds all of this deeply unfair. Even if the king doesn't care about her, she's still the mother of his child. How can he allow her to be treated so poorly? Thinking about this, Errol starts crying again, and Xena hands him over to Lady Rafana. He calms down in her arms. Even though he's just a baby, Errol wants to help his mother somehow. He knows he doesn't have strength or power yet, but he has to do something. Winter is coming, and the cost of keeping the house warm will rise. Lying in his crib, he starts thinking of a solution. Looking at the fireplace, he remembers that coal is made of carbon, and diamonds are also made of carbon. That's when Errol gets an idea. If he can turn coal into a diamond, he can solve the household's money problem. Even though he wants to jump out of the crib and get started right away, he knows his baby body is still fragile. So he decides to carefully use his mana to levitate. No one there knows that coal can become something so valuable, but to Errol, it feels like he's found a hidden treasure. With everyone asleep, he begins to work. He uses his mana along with the heat to compress the coal. He pours all of his energy into the process, trying to stay focused even as the pressure pushes back against him. He keeps thinking about how happy his mother will be when she sees the result. Suddenly, an explosion of energy occurs, and soot flies up through the chimney. Errol crawls over to the fireplace and digs through the grime until he finds what he's looking for, a shining diamond, created by his own hands. The sparkle of the gem leaves him speechless. Now he just needs to find a way to give the diamond to his mother without raising suspicion. Satisfied, he goes back to sleep. The next morning, Xena enters the room and finds Errol outside the crib, completely covered in ashes. She can't understand how he got out. She assumes he must have played too much during the night, but when she sees the mess in the room, everything starts to feel strange. The floor, the fireplace, and the rug are all filthy. She tells him not to touch the floor, but Errol ignores her. Quickly, he comes up with an idea and puts the diamond in his mouth. Xena notices something odd, tells him to spit it out, and when she presses his cheeks, the diamond falls out. She panics and asks where he got that. Another servant, also named Xena, who is in charge of the treasures, confirms that nothing was stolen from the palace. That's when they realize that maybe Errol made it as a gift. Xena hugs him and says that he must have been trying to give the diamond to her. Errol smiles, thinking that his mother will be happy about this too. Later on, several wagons arrive at the palace. They bring enough food and firewood to last 5 years, all thanks to the diamond. Rafanna worries about who the jewel might have belonged to, but Xena reassures her, saying that everything is fine. After all, the castle had been abandoned for almost 100 years before Rafanna came to live there. She also says that maybe the diamond was a blessing meant for the young prince. Even with her doubts, Rafanna feels grateful for the supplies. Errol grabs onto her dress and thinks that all he needs to do now is find a way to protect her until he grows up. He dreams of a future where she no longer has to suffer. As he clings to her, Rafanna promises that she will find a way to let the king know that he has a son named Errol. That winter is the coldest on record, yet it somehow feels warmer. The palace is full again, the house is in order, and his mother is happy. A year passes, and Xena and Lady Rafanna begin choosing clothes for little Errol. He tries on several outfits until he gets tired and throws himself onto the floor, whining. The two of them panic for a moment, until Xena realizes he's just exhausted and takes him back to the crib. That's when she reveals that Prince Errol will officially be recognized as part of the royal family. Confused, Errol wonders what she means by recognized. Rafanna is happy that he has grown up healthy and starts wondering if the king will show up for his birthday. Xena tries to calm her down, saying that the king is simply waiting for the right time, since newborns often become targets for trouble. Errol listens to the conversation and realizes that all this preparation is because of his birthday. Lady Rafanna comments that not everyone may be pleased with the banquet, but this is the perfect chance to announce that Errol carries royal blood. She is glad that the laws of the royal family of Hernesia also apply to her son, and Errol notices how excited his mother is, guessing that it's because of the event. Then it hits him. If there's going to be a banquet, the nobles and other members of the royal family will be there as well. That means he might finally get to see his father. The grand banquet begins that night, and the celebration is enormous, filled with food, beautiful decorations, and important people dressed in elegant clothes. Errol is amazed by everything, thinking it feels almost like a dream. Lady Rafanna picks him up and asks if he's surprised. Everything seems so new to him, and Xena comments that this might be the first time he's ever seen so many people gathered in one place. Lady Rafanna reminds him that he's the star of the night and kisses his cheek. Even with his mother's affection, Errol notices the judgmental stares from the nobles and hears some cruel remarks about him and Lady Rafanna. He tries not to let it bother him. His focus is elsewhere. He wants to see King Terrell, the man who is his father. When the royal family enters, the atmosphere changes completely. Their presence is overwhelming, and Errol assumes that the woman with them must be the queen, along with her children, his half-siblings, and the eldest one, who looks like the heir. A young woman also catches his attention, acting as if she's in a world of her own. Errol realizes he will need to learn more about all of them, but as they pass by him and his mother, not a single one of them even notices their existence. Lady Rafanna senses the tension and tries to cheer Errol up, making him smile. Even though it's difficult for her, she manages to lighten his mood. All eyes soon turn to the queen, who is admired by everyone present. Suddenly, Errol notices his mother's expression change, as if something is bothering her. He looks around and understands the king has arrived. His presence is so powerful that Errol freezes for a moment. He tries to guess whether the king is looking at him or at Lady Rafanna, and at that moment, he thinks about how nice it would be to be able to read minds. As time passes, people begin congratulating him and giving him gifts, but when it's the royal family's turn, their disdain is painfully obvious. Errol feels a surge of anger and wants to run over and confront that woman who pretended they didn't even exist. But he decides to do nothing so he won't embarrass his mother. He swallows his pride and acts the way they expect him to act, because everything there is built on pretense. Almost asleep in his mother's arms, Errol notices a girl nearby. He assumes she must be the daughter of some concubine. She was far too young to be in that kind of environment, yet there was something about her that caught his attention. When the banquet finally comes to an end, he and Lady Rafanna are able to breathe a sigh of relief, but the night is still far from over. The queen approaches them and comments on how easy it is to find them, thanks to Errol's constant presence. Hearing that, Errol isn't sure whether she's showing off or deliberately provoking him. She praises Errol, saying that he looks just like his mother, but he doesn't believe her sincerity for a second. He is certain she was behind the hardships they went through. After all, even the castle's knights had been forced to work as lumberjacks, and their clothes looked like they were made from scraps. The queen wishes them a long life, then leaves with a smile that leaves a bitter taste behind. Soon after, Lady Rafanna notices the king, and when he sees her, he asks whether she has been adapting to life in the castle. She politely answers yes, but Errol knows that isn't entirely true. What she really wants is for the king to take action, to act like a true father. Seeing this, Errol suddenly starts crying loudly, and the king asks to hold him. It is the first time the king has seen Errol in an entire year. The king looks confused, since many of his children cry when they see him, but Errol simply smiles instead. The king finds it amusing and thinks to himself that a baby's smile can leave even a king at a loss for words. He even comments that he might raise the boy himself in the future, but Errol doesn't want to stay in his arms. He squirms around, making the king believe that he wants to walk. Lady Rafanna explains that he can't walk yet, since he's only 1 year old, but seeing that, Errol decides to prove otherwise. He takes his first steps right there in front of everyone, and the entire hall erupts in excitement. Everyone starts cheering. Even the king looks surprised and impressed. Errol wants to show that he isn't an ordinary baby, but when he leans against the table for support, he suddenly falls. As a result, food and drink spill all over him, and everyone panics. But this was nothing more than a little performance by Errol. He did it on purpose. Seeing Errol completely soaked in wine, the king says that he needs to change clothes. The queen tries to help, but the king refuses and says he wants to take care of it himself. What happens next shocks everyone. When the king removes Errol's dirty clothes, he discovers that underneath, the baby is wearing undergarments so old and torn that they barely seem worthy of a prince. Xena, confused, says that she had dressed Errol in clean clothes that very morning, and the king realizes just how difficult his son's life has been up until now. The people around them begin to whisper, calling it shameful, and irritated by the comments, the king raises his voice and orders everyone to be silent. His words echo throughout the entire hall, frightening everyone present. He then looks at Lady Rafanna and seems to truly realize, for the first time, just how badly she and her son have been treated there. Meanwhile, Errol is satisfied, because everything went exactly as he planned. His clothes were deliberately ruined. That very morning, while Xena was dressing him, he used all the strength he had to tear the fabric without anyone noticing. After that, with a bit of magic, he made them look even worse. His goal was clear, to show just how miserable their situation really was. If he were older and stronger, he could have done it without magic, but in his current state, that wasn't possible. The king then asks Lady Rafanna how this happened, how things were allowed to reach this point. But when he sees her condition, he stops himself. Instead, he calls over one of his officials and demands an explanation about the money that was supposed to be sent to the concubine's castle. The king says that he had already given clear orders. The funds were to be distributed fairly. So why did that castle look so abandoned? He demands a financial report immediately, and Errol watches everything closely, realizing that his father is genuinely trying to fix their situation. Errol feels a surge of anticipation, eager to see what the documents will reveal. Lady Rafanna, on the other hand, grows nervous and tries to ease the tension, saying that there must have been some kind of mistake, and asks for Errol back. But Errol knows this is his only chance, and he has no intention of letting it slip away. The royal secretary arrives with the papers, and as the king reads them, his expression turns completely shocked. Without thinking twice, he burns the documents with magic right in front of everyone. The act surprises even Errol, who hadn't expected the king to be so unaware of what was really going on. It is obvious that the queen is the one at fault. The king stares at her and asks if she knew about all of this. She pretends to be surprised, but he doesn't believe her. He reminds her that managing the palace's budget was her responsibility, and his expression grows even more severe. The eldest son seizes the moment to try to defend the queen, his mother. He stands up and says it must have been a mistake, that his mother would never do something like this on purpose. Instead of helping, that only angers the king further. He says that as the one in charge, she is responsible for her subordinates' mistakes, and that because of this failure, his youngest son went hungry and lacked even proper clothing. The eldest prince then looks at Errol, filled with guilt, making the situation even more uncomfortable. He clearly lacks his father's authority and his mother's cunning. So the king asks if he truly believes his mother knew nothing about it. Without even waiting for an answer, he turns back to the queen and tells her how deeply disappointed he is in her. Lady Rafana tries to protect her, saying that the blame is hers instead, but the king doesn't understand why she would blame herself. He says that the simple fact that she is the mother of his child should have been enough to guarantee her respect from everyone. Next, he takes her hand and asks her not to lower herself like that. And, well, that immediately infuriates the queen and her eldest son. The king then demands that the person responsible be found and makes it clear that something like this must never happen again. The queen, visibly shaken, promises that she will handle the problem, and the king warns her that if this ever happens again, there will be consequences. She keeps apologizing and insisting that she will find the culprit, yet she seems unable to understand why the king is so furious. Rafana also grows tense, and Errol notices that his mother is defending the very woman who most likely caused all of this. He cannot understand why she would do that, and while the queen keeps promising that it will never happen again, Errol realizes that she does not look remorseful at all. Instead, she simply intimidates everyone around her with her overwhelming presence. And just like that, Errol's birthday comes to an end. The issue involving the money appears to have been resolved, and later it is officially announced that the queen was not at fault. They claim that a low-ranking noble family was responsible for everything. So they are accused, they confess, and shortly after that, they are executed without a trial. This makes the servants question why everything happened so quickly, and no one can understand how that family could have embezzled such a large amount of money in the first place. Almost everyone feels relieved that the problem was, quote-unquote, resolved. Everyone except Errol himself. He knows that the true culprit walked away untouched, and even though the case was officially closed, to him it all feels deeply unjust. He decides that when he grows up, he will teach everyone involved a lesson, but for now, he is trapped in the body of a baby, and his main concern is food. He cries to be fed and is soon spoiled with small spoonfuls of delicious food. Deep down, he is actually quite happy, but he knows he needs to grow stronger if he ever wants to make a difference. After thinking it through, Errol realizes that, in the end, all he really needs to do right now is eat and play. Once his belly is full, he feels sleep creeping in and decides to take a nap. Sometime later, he wakes up to the sound of a carriage stopping in front of his home and quickly flies over to the window to see what is happening, while his nanny continues to sleep soundly. Outside, he sees a group of people stepping out of the carriage, and shortly afterward, 3 of them enter his room: his mother, an adult woman, and a little girl. Errol remembers that the nanny is still there asleep, and if she were to see him using his powers, she might discover everything. So he quickly flies back and starts pinching her cheeks to wake her up. The adults walk in just in time to witness this, and his mother shouts for him to stop bothering the nanny. The nanny wakes up and immediately realizes that a new concubine has arrived. She rushes to greet the visitor, and Errol also watches the woman who has just entered. She is Finalia, one of the king's other wives. Everyone starts saying that they would have prepared a better reception if they had known about the visit, but Finalia explains that she came without notice and that she needs to speak with Errol's mother in private. Lady Rafana, even though she does not understand the reason for the visit, agrees. As they get ready to talk, she even ends up choking slightly on her tea. Finalia looks remorseful and apologizes for what happened at Errol's birthday banquet. She explains that her family was once very influential and played an important role in battles across the continent. However, those glorious days are long gone. Now, her family is facing serious problems because no more children are being born, and their reputation is slowly fading away. On top of that, There are also rumors that they have been struggling financially for years. Lady Rafanna asks if that is the reason Finalia came, and Finalia admits that her family is deeply in debt, adding that she is also under constant pressure from the queen, which only made everything worse. She takes out a small pouch of money and hands it to Lady Rafanna. She says it is not much, but she wanted to do whatever she could. She also says that she would understand if Rafanna felt anger toward her or her family. At that moment, Finalia's daughter slowly steps into the room, and it becomes very clear that all Finalia wants is to protect the girl and keep her away from political conflicts. Rafanna responds calmly, saying that everything is fine and that none of this is Finalia's fault. She makes it clear that she understands the situation and holds no resentment at all. Rafanna then hands the pouch of money back, saying it would be better spent on something for Finalia's daughter. She also mentions that she understands why Finalia's family has been trying to keep such tight control over the palace's expenses. Then she reveals something important, explaining that she believes all of this is happening because she, Rafanna, serves the queen directly. That revelation catches Errol completely off guard. He starts connecting the dots and realizes that this might be the reason his mother is so disliked by everyone. As that thought sinks in, he begins pacing back and forth, clearly unsettled by what he has just discovered. Xena notices his restlessness and asks if everything is all right. Errol quickly covers it up with a smile so she will not worry, and she assumes he is simply irritated. She says she will take him to distract him, doing some light exercises with Princess Kenya. With everyone occupied, Errol decides to hide and listen in on the rest of the conversation between his mother and Finalia, and this time, it is Lady Rafanna who speaks. She explains how she feels trapped and constantly watched by the queen. She says her greatest goal is to protect Errol while he is still small and fragile. Her voice becomes serious and firm, making it clear that she is determined not to let anyone harm him. Lady Rafanna wants to grow closer to Finalia, but not merely out of friendship. She has other reasons. Finalia notices this, yet she respects Rafanna's resolve, and the two of them come to an understanding that, in difficult times, they will be able to rely on one another. Meanwhile, young Prince Errol is lost in his thoughts. He has already realized that his mother understands very well what is happening among the queen and the other concubines. What he does not yet know is what her next move will be in the face of all this. As he ponders that, a girl suddenly appears beside him, and Errol has no idea how she managed to get there so fast. He silently hopes she will leave soon, but the opposite happens. She comes closer, climbs into his crib, and starts squeezing his cheeks, saying how adorable he is. She treats Errol like a stuffed toy and even rocks the crib as if it were a game. All he can think about is how badly he wants to be rescued, even by a truck if necessary. Suddenly, a cat shows up as well and seems to take a liking to him too. Errol realizes there is no escaping this, and the nanny says it is perfectly fine for the princess to visit. Naturally, the girl becomes even more excited, while Errol understands that he is on his own, with no way out. Time passes quickly, and in the blink of an eye, Errol is already close to 3 years old. He can hardly believe how much he has grown in such a short time. It makes him think about everything he still needs to learn before becoming an adult. Fragments of memories from past lives surface in his mind, and he wonders if he has lived through something like this before. Suddenly, the princess appears again and runs straight toward him. This time, Errol decides to play a little game of hide and seek, but unfortunately, she finds him almost immediately. It leaves him slightly frustrated, though for her, it is just another fun game. Without waiting for a response, the princess runs off, searching for a bigger place to play. Soon, they are outside, and Errol notices that since Finalia's arrival, the princess has been visiting much more often, always with the help of the nanny. Even though he is not particularly fond of all the noise and excitement, he begins to realize that it is creating a stronger bond between them. Despite Errol's young age, Princess Kenya believes he is already someone special, someone worth protecting, and she even says that one day, it will be his turn to take care of her. She makes Errol promise that he will come back to see her soon, and he, confused, cannot understand why she likes him so much. Before he can think too deeply about it, Kenya says she loves playing with him and insists that he is far more fun than anyone else. Errol laughs, thinking that she might regret saying that once she grows up. Kenya picks him up and says it is time to play in their favorite place, but Errol feels like he is about to be crushed by her enthusiasm. Luckily, a maid appears and points out that he must be uncomfortable being carried like that. She scolds the princess, reminding her that even though she is royalty, she is still just a child and should not be carrying heavy weight. Errol feels an overwhelming sense of relief at being saved, even if only barely. Kenya, however, is not happy about it at all. She starts yelling, saying that she just wants to play, and the maid tries to calm her down by suggesting she draw something or listen to music, but Kenya wants none of that. She says that what she really wants is to learn how to fight with a sword just like her brother, Kyle. Errol watches as she tries to train with the wooden staff and quickly realizes that her balance is completely off and the staff itself is too heavy and poorly positioned for her. Even so, Kenya throws herself fully into the game, pretending she is defeating an invisible enemy and celebrating her victory like a great hero. The maid tries to explain that Kenya cannot train the same way Kyle or Lenny does. This only irritates the princess because she cannot understand why boys are allowed to do it and she is not. The maid says that it is not proper for a princess to dirty her hands with this kind of thing, reminding her that she is supposed to act with elegance. But Kenya does not care about any of those rules. She grabs the maid's own sword and, before anyone can stop her, starts excitedly talking about learning swordsmanship. The maid panics and rushes after the princess, begging her to give the sword back or at least take the scabbard with her. Errol watches the scene unfold and realizes that he is starting to like Kenya more and more. Time passes, and now Prince Errol is already 5 years old. He is out in the palace courtyard, feeling brave and powerful while playing at being a knight. But in reality, he is just riding a toy horse, rocking back and forth and having a great time. Xena, his caretaker, helps with his training and says that it is time for him to try riding a real horse. But Errol immediately refuses, saying it is far too dangerous. Xena insists, saying that a prince's age should like horses, swords, and things like that, but Errol simply replies that a prince does not have to do all of that. This leaves Xena a little disappointed, making her feel like he lacks ambition. But the truth is that Errol is not an ordinary boy. In fact, this is already his 100th life. He has lived so many times that he has lost count, and what he learned across all those lives is that being too good at anything only brings trouble. Whenever he stood out in combat, magic, or any other talent, he ended up attracting dangerous people or being used by others. That is exactly why, in this life, he just wants to live calmly, especially since he was born a prince. He wants to enjoy comfort without drawing attention, and once they return to the castle, he tells Xena that he wants some time alone. She agrees, but gives him a slightly suspicious look. As soon as she leaves and he closes the door, Errol lightly kicks the floor and simply stands there, doing nothing at all. Later on, he gets himself into trouble again. Xena is upset and asks why he hates studying so much. She says that a 5-year-old prince should already be excited to learn, but Errol does not care. He has no interest in the world or in gathering knowledge. Xena even jokes during the conversation, saying that he sounds like someone who has lived 100 lives, but Errol cuts her off, telling her that it is not her fault he feels this way. Deep down, he has already decided that he just wants to enjoy this life, without any rush. It is a true live-in-the-moment mindset. After so many lives, all he wants now is to rest and enjoy himself. Even so, Xena reminds him that now that he is 5 years old, palace rules require him to start studying. She brings simple books, chosen especially for him, but Errol picks one of them up and starts spinning it around like a toy. Xena grows irritated and tells him that books are meant to be read, not played with. She tries to guilt him, saying that many children would give anything for the chance to study, but Errol still does not care. Instead of reading, he simply starts stacking the books, as if he were building a little house. Xena tries to make him stop and sit down properly, but he completely ignores her. When words fail, she watches him slip into full drama mode, whining and yelling that he is not going to study. Suddenly, the doors swing open and Errol's mother walks in with that unmistakable look of enough is enough. And, let's be honest, nothing is more terrifying to a child than the serious stare of an angry mother. Immediately, Errol drags himself over to the library and starts studying, of course, complaining the entire time. Even with the book open in front of him, he thinks that all of this is pointless. In his mind, if parents truly cared about his education, they would also make sure he was safe. But in that world, being talented is practically an invitation to trouble. The more exceptional a child is, the greater the danger they face, and that danger often spills over onto the people around them as well. Errol finds all of it deeply unfair, but he has already accepted that this is how things work. All he wants now is a peaceful life, free from threats and stress. As he drifts through these thoughts, Xena pulls his attention back, telling him that he needs to make an effort to make others proud. Errol listens, thinks it over, and decides that this is still too much for him to deal with right now. Xena does not let it go and warns him that if he keeps acting like this, his mother will end up feeling sad, and that hits him right in the chest. Even though he hates studying, He decides to try, just so he will not disappoint his mother. One thing, however, he makes very clear. He wants nothing to do with swords or magic, because he has already suffered too much from being overly talented and does not want to repeat that in this life. Now, he begins thinking about ways to live well without getting himself into trouble. A few days later, a very elegant carriage stops in front of the concubine's residence. Xena informs Errol that a mage from the magic tower has come to check his mana capacity. If he shows talent, they will want to train him. To Errol, this is terrible news. He knows that he possesses an absurd amount of mana, and any experienced mage would notice it immediately. His only chance to escape is to hide that power. As he walks down the corridor to meet the mage, he keeps his head lowered, trying to look as ordinary as possible. Xena tries to encourage him, saying that even if he does not have much mana, it can still be developed with training. But when the door opens, the look on the mage's face shows that something is wrong. He looks genuinely shocked. The mage stands up and stares directly at Errol. They observe each other, and Errol tries to imagine how the mage is seeing his mana. The mage then takes the prince's arm to check his vital signs, and says that something feels strange. Xena, excited, asks if Errol is special, but the mage replies that he does not know whether Errol is special or simply unusual. He says that he cannot sense any mana in Errol at all, and that even when he tries to detect it using his own mana, he finds nothing. This leaves Xena completely stunned, while inside, Errol feels proud of what he has accomplished. Before entering the room, he had used his ki to compress his own mana and push it to the edges of his body, as if hiding his secret weapon. The plan worked. No one expected a child of royal blood to have no mana, and he managed to fool everyone. The mage informs Lady Rafanna that Errol has no talent for magic, which leaves her visibly confused. He even adds that even common villagers usually have at least a small amount of mana, but Errol seems to have none at all. This makes Errol wonder if he might have gone a little too far. Lady Rafanna looks shaken at the thought that her son lacks what it takes to become a mage. But that is exactly what Errol wanted. He wants everyone to believe that he has no gift for mana. So he keeps pretending to be upset, sticking to his little act, fully aware that all of this is only the beginning. The next day, Errol meets his new fencing instructor, a young knight named Landfill Tagarin. Errol watches him for a moment and immediately thinks the man looks boring and weak, nothing like the opponents he faced in his past lives. He has fought monsters and survived wars, so nothing about this knight impresses him. Still, he plays along and says he will train, even though he knows that, in truth, the training will benefit Landfill far more than it will benefit him. Errol has absolutely no desire to put in real effort, especially when he sees his sister Kenya walking around with weights to build her strength. Landfill then explains that this kind of heavy training is a tradition of the Kinchester family, and Errol replies that it sounds more like something a martial artist would do than a prince. When Errol asks what the training plan is, the instructor explains that fencing is not just about strength. Balance and flexibility are equally important. To demonstrate his point, Landfill performs a few sword movements in front of the children and suggests starting with something light, like balancing on logs, for example. Errol immediately complains, saying he is afraid of falling, even though the logs are practically touching the ground. Landfill tries to reassure him, saying that even if he falls, it will not hurt at all. Errol then asks what he is supposed to do, since he is afraid of heights. After that, the training continues, and now it is time to work on flexibility. Landfill expects Errol to do well. After all, he is still a child. Instead, he is surprised to see that Errol struggles even to reach his own feet. Even so, the knight does not give up and decides to move on to the next stage, training with a wooden sword. Landfill explains that the key is to use the momentum of the rotation to perform the movement correctly. Errol tries to follow the instructions, but he messes up so badly that the sword slips out of his hand and goes flying across the training ground. Landfill is left speechless by the sight, while Errol, pretending to be devastated, says that he is terrible with swords. Landfill encourages him, saying that it is normal to fail on the first try and that with practice, he would improve. He hands Errol another sword, and the two continue training. Throughout it all, Errol feels like he is being watched. He makes sure to perform poorly on purpose, wanting word to spread that he is hopeless at training. And it works. Rumors begin to circulate among the nobles, saying that Prince Errol is so clumsy he barely seems noble at all, that he failed at everything, and that he looks like he would trip over his own feet. Meanwhile, back at the concubine's residence, Errol is enjoying a quiet moment, eating cookies and drinking orange juice. a rather curious choice for ancient times. Then he hears that a new tutor is on the way to give him lessons. The reputation of being useless that spread around ended up driving almost all the tutors away. So Errol starts wondering who could possibly be brave enough, or crazy enough, to accept this job. He runs to the window and sees the tutor stepping out of a carriage, and shortly after, he learns that the man's name is Gao Perennia. The atmosphere becomes a bit awkward the moment Gao enters, since he has come to teach someone everyone believes is hopeless, and Errol is already bored before the lesson even begins. He assumes the tutor will start with literature, as usual, followed by those standard lessons on common and foreign languages. Gao places a stack of books in front of him and says that the basics of grammar can be learned in a single day. However, because of Errol's reputation, he adds a few extra days, as if it would not really matter whether Errol learned it or not. That bothers Errol, so he decides that this time, he will actually put in real effort. Gao continues speaking, saying that poor grades do not necessarily mean someone is lazy. Sometimes it is simply the way a person's mind works. He tries to encourage Errol, but the praise comes out half disguised, and that only irritates him more. Errol starts to feel uncomfortable. He wanted people to stop pressuring him so much, but now he realizes that being treated with pity hurts just as much. Later that night, he slips into stealth mode and sneaks into the library. He feels like a true ninja, moving with ease and precision. Thanks to the countless lives he has lived, Errol already knows how to speak several languages from a very young age. As he walks through the library, he wonders if it might be time to show everyone just how intelligent he really is. With mana flowing through his hands, he begins pulling books from the shelves using magic, since he is still too short to reach them on his own. And he does not grab only grammar books. He takes books on other languages as well. He wants to learn more than he already knows. He organizes everything on the table and sits down to study. As he opens one of the books, he thinks about how languages tend to share similar patterns. Across all his lives, he has never stopped learning. And that night, he dives into his studies, determined to prove that, despite appearances, he is a true genius. A few days later, Jimbo showed up and said that the jokes had gone way too far. He asked whether Errol truly knew how to speak the common tongue, and Errol simply sighed and assured him that he was not lying. Then, to prove it, he began reading a text out loud. Gamal was suspicious, thinking that Errol might have just memorized a few passages, but even so, he said that, even if that were the case, it would already be impressive on its own, since the kingdom's official language was extremely complicated. Then Gamal challenged Errol to pick up any book and read it. He also reminded everyone that even the brightest children only managed to learn the basics after 12 years, and Errol was only 5 years old. Even so, Errol grabbed a book and began reading everything flawlessly, leaving Gamal completely stunned. And that very night, rumors about Errol started spreading. Before, everyone laughed at him for being clumsy and terrible with a sword, but now the story was different. The gossip claimed that, in just 2 days, he had already mastered the common tongue and could even solve math problems in his head as if it were nothing. That was how the reputation of Errol the Genius was born. But where did those rumors come from? Well, inside a tavern, someone talked more than they should have. Or rather, drank more than they should have. Jane Bay, Errol's tutor, was drunk and bragging to everyone. He kept saying that he had always believed in the prince's talent when no one else did. He repeated over and over that talent only needed the right tutor. And of course, he placed himself as the one responsible for Errol's brilliance. That conversation eventually reached the king's ears, and, impressed, he commented to Lady Rafanna that perhaps the boy had never done well with swords and magic simply because that was not his true field. And so, Errol began his new life as a prince recognized for his intelligence. A few days later, Errol noticed that there were many more guards stationed near the concubine's castle. He quickly understood that, since he could neither fight nor use magic, the king had probably sent the guards there to protect him. This made Errol happy, thinking that the king must have been in a good mood. And on that same day, Xena left a huge chest there, and Errol's mother explained that it was a gift from the king. When Errol opened it, he found piles of gold coins, shining jewels, and several treasures inside. Among all of it, a chain caught his attention, and Xena asked if that was perhaps the most valuable item. But Errol said he did not care about value, only that it was the most incredible thing in the chest. He then put the chain on and commented that it helped him think faster and prevented fatigue, almost like a super brain. Xena was impressed, believing it was the result of how much he studied, but Errol pretended it was no big deal. In truth, the necklace looked ordinary to everyone else, but Errol could clearly see the mana device hidden within the jewel, and even without needing it, he knew that its interior concealed even more secrets. As he stared at the necklace, Errol could not stop thinking about Kania, who continued training with the sword and was growing stronger every day. He then asked his mother if he could give the necklace to her. Rafana, gently patting her son's head, said that since it was a gift from the king, he would be happy with that as well. After that, she asked what he liked so much about Kania. Errol replied that it was her strength, and that made all the maids burst out laughing. The entire castle was happy that day, happy to see that the prince was loved by the king. Even the guards began bragging about being able to work at the concubine's castle. Days later, Errol was sitting at the dining table with Xena. She said that all the dishes he had requested were ready. Then she asked what he thought, and as he tasted them one by one, he was not satisfied with any of them. Irritated, he kept searching for something better, and Xena asked him to slow down. She asked if any of them were good, but Errol complained, saying that none of them were good enough or with trustworthy alchemists, and besides that, he also asked whether Errol needed anything else. Xena commented that those desserts had been prepared by the best chefs available and even offered to call one of them over. That was when Errol had a sudden realization. What he needed was not a cook, but an alchemist. This left Xena completely confused, and meanwhile, Errol began drifting into his thoughts, remembering Coca-Cola and the old snacks from his past life, the ones he missed so much. Just imagining the taste of Coke almost made him drool, and he knew he would need an alchemist to recreate it, though he also understood that it would be far more difficult than it sounded. Confused, Xena asked why he would need an alchemist, and Errol realized that he had spoken out loud without meaning to. He considered explaining, but gave up, since it would sound strange, especially coming from an 8-year-old child, and instead of talking, he began organizing the problem in his head. The kingdom lacked both the techniques and the ingredients needed to create anything remotely similar to Coke, and the more Errol thought about it, the more he realized how complicated it truly was. It was not just about ingredients, but about multiple processes that simply did not exist there. Feeling a bit discouraged, he went back to daydreaming about the possibility of drinking soda again, but soon reminded himself that he was supposed to be a genius, and that if anyone could figure it out, it would be him. Suddenly, he jumped out of bed and ran out of the room. Xena was left completely bewildered and asked where he was going, and he replied that he was going to study, leaving her confused, unsure if she had really heard him correctly. As he ran through the castle, Errol focused on a single thought, and that was chemistry, because cooking and chemistry had always gone hand in hand. That was when he became certain that alchemy was the key to uncovering the secret behind Coke. Several years passed, and now Errol, at 8 years old, was already leading meetings. Seated at the head of the table, he discussed bridge constructions in commercial areas. One of the supervisors asked for his opinion on the plans, and Errol praised the drawings, but then asked who had designed them. When the responsible man stepped forward, Errol's expression changed, and he said that if he showed up with another useless project, he would be fired, plunging the entire room into silence. The boy explained that the project would work for a while, but would turn into a disaster during winter. With the weight of accumulated snow, the wooden sections would collapse, since the design focused more on beauty than on safety. He made it clear that while impressing people was important, protecting lives always came first. Then he ordered them to redo the project and immediately moved on to the next blueprint. With the absurd amount of knowledge he possessed, Errol already worked more than all the specialists combined, and because of that, the adults decided to place their trust in the 8-year-old genius. Errol even felt a bit sorry for them, but he knew he had to keep proving his worth. At the end of the meeting, a new maid called him by a popular nickname. He was horrified, thinking it was the tackiest thing he had ever heard. Realizing that the maid was new, he asked her never to call him that again. She promised she would remember, but moments later, she repeated the nickname, and Errol began thinking to himself, in silence, about how ridiculous it was. On the way out, the carriage departed. Lady Rafana, looking out the window, asked Shayna whether Errol was heading somewhere important. Shayna explained that he was going to meet the king and almost revealed the boy's interest in alchemy. Inside the carriage, Errol tried to imagine how the king would react to his request, and even though he felt confident, he still found himself uneasy in the presence of the great king. When they finally met, the king asked why he wanted to study alchemy. Errol explained that he wanted to help the kingdom even more, since he was not skilled with the sword or with magic. His true strength lay in knowledge. Hearing that, the king was impressed by the boy's maturity and agreed to help him, promising to place him under the guidance of trusted alchemists. Errol politely said that if he needed anything else, he would not hesitate to ask later. The king was pleased with that response, and Errol left happily, knowing that his plan had worked. The news then spread very quickly, and soon the kingdom's alchemists began appearing, eager to show their skills to the boy. They were all seeking recognition, so it was no surprise that, when Demon Rinchi was chosen, He was already famous for creating special mirrors capable of reflecting sunlight across extremely long distances. Those mirrors had already been used at the Western Fortress to drive away invaders. A few days later, Errol met Demon at the concubine's castle. Demon praised the garden, but Errol was far more interested in him. Based on his reputation, Errol had expected to meet an older alchemist, but instead found someone who looked surprisingly young. Noticing his surprise, Demon explained that his white hair was the result of an accident involving several toxic gases years earlier. That made Errol realize that Demon had nearly died during his studies. Demon then warned him that alchemy was far more dangerous than he probably imagined, and that if anything happened to Errol, he himself would be held responsible. He even mentioned the prince's young age, but before he could continue, Errol interrupted him and said that he knew exactly what he was getting into. He also emphasized that alchemy was not magic, but science, so he was not interested in nonsense like turning stones into marshmallows. He wanted to truly learn. The lessons began immediately, and within just a few days, Errol became completely immersed in his studies. This led Demon to ask whether he had ever worked with alchemy before. Errol grew slightly worried that he had shown too much knowledge, but Demon laughed and said that the rumors about him being a genius were clearly not exaggerated. That left Errol relieved, feeling that his act of simply being a diligent student was working. The two of them began working intensely from dawn until sunset. Over time, Errol discovered that iron could be made more resistant by mixing it with eggshells or bone ash. He shared this insight with Demon, and the two continued advancing together. Later on, Errol learned how to extract lead and other materials. He noticed that, aside from a few metals and special medicines unique to that world, everything else was practically identical to what he remembered from his past lives. He ended up letting that comment slip, and Demon immediately asked what he meant by that. Errol quickly covered it up, pretending that he had just been talking to himself. Seeing that everything was progressing smoothly, Errol wrote a letter to the king requesting even more alchemists. The king approved the request immediately and ordered them to be summoned. Only one advisor showed concern about the costs, but the king interrupted him, saying that he trusted Errol's work would bring great benefits in the future. Back at the castle, Errol shocked everyone by announcing that he wanted to create a soft drink, a soda. The alchemists were stunned and asked whether he truly intended to spend time working on food. Errol replied enthusiastically that that was exactly what he wanted. He explained a few basic principles, but quickly noticed their disappointment. They had arrived expecting grand achievements, only to be asked to make beverages. One of them complained that he had abandoned a teaching position at the Alchemy Academy just to end up becoming a cook's apprentice. Then Errol, trying to calm everyone down, promised that they would all be well paid regardless of the outcome. That settled things, and they began discussing ideas. The first step was obtaining carbonated water. This type of water existed naturally in certain regions, so it could be brought in fairly quickly. Errol understood that those men were not driven by passion, but by money or fame, yet he still knew they would be useful in speeding up his research. A few days later, barrels filled with carbonated water arrived. Errol was excited, but when Demon opened one of the barrels, the smell made everyone step back immediately. He asked whether they really needed to drink that. Errol said they had to test it, but when he tasted the first barrel, he nearly vomited. The water was completely undrinkable. They checked all the barrels, and every single one was bad. Even so, Errol remained calm, saying that if they could not use natural carbonated water, then they would have to create artificial sparkling water instead. Errol then handed out papers filled with theories, outlining possible paths they could take to solve the problem, seeing that everyone was feeling discouraged. Errol tried to calm them down, saying that they were the best alchemists in the kingdom and that they would solve the problem in no time. When he looked at Demon, hoping for support, he realized that even Demon did not look all that enthusiastic. After all, those men truly were the greatest scholars the kingdom had. Even so, Errol spoke excitedly, saying that running experiments and working with theories should be paradise for them. On the inside, however, Errol wondered whether they could really manage it in just 1 week, but given how difficult the challenge was, he believed it would push them to work faster. A few days later, Errol arrived in high spirits, saying that carbonated water could bring enormous profits and energy to the kingdom. The alchemists, however, were not nearly as convinced, thinking it was nothing more than a marketing trick. To Errol's surprise, they had already managed to produce artificial carbonated water. He took some to taste it, while Demon and the other alchemists watched with curiosity. The water had strong carbonation, but no flavor at all. That made everyone skeptical, but Errol explained that it was not meant to be drunk on its own, but mixed with juice or even alcohol. His true dream had been to recreate Coke, but since he had failed, this drink would serve as a substitute. The success was immediate. The drink's reputation spread like wildfire and turned into a luxury item even beyond the kingdom's borders. Lord Dement, the Count of the North, could not understand how it had worked so well. He confirmed with his servant that it truly had been the idea of a prince, and now the soda was generating fortunes for the kingdom, with rumors of entire wagons filled with gold arriving at the concubines' palaces every single day. The Count gnawed at his own regret for having ignored Errol at his first birthday and for having judged him as useless. He swore to himself that he would never miss an opportunity like that again. 2 years passed, and at the concubine's castle, Kania, now 16 years old, demonstrated her sword techniques. After the training session, she nervously asked Errol, who was 10, what he thought. He hesitated for a moment, then said that she was incredible. Her attendant agreed, stating that Kania's swordsmanship was flawless. Errol also believed she was far more skilled than any boy her age. Kania grew overjoyed, jumping in place and thanking them both. Watching all that happiness, Errol thought to himself that she looked especially cute when she smiled. Later, the two of them sat in the garden to drink tea, and Kania commented on how the soda had not only helped the palace, but also boosted the kingdom's economy. Errol, maintaining his composure, said that it was his duty as a prince. Kania then mentioned rumors claiming that he was the perfect son, and that many people were jealous of Lady Rafanna because of it. The conversation shifted when Kania drew her sword and said that all the money in the world was useless if he could not fight. Pointing the blade at Errol, she declared that she would teach him. Completely unimpressed, he thanked her, but declined, thinking that he had no interest in becoming a swordsman in this new life. Even so, Kania did not give up and suddenly attacked Errol, forcing him to defend himself. He realized that it would be easier to go along with her game and play along. He even calculated that, if he did this with Kania, he might be able to help her achieve her dream of building a family of swordsmen. Sometime later, Errol was traveling calmly by carriage, thinking about what the king wanted to discuss with him. Perhaps it was more rewards for his accomplishments. Upon arriving, he joined the king for lunch. In the past, sitting in silence with the king made him nervous, but by now, he was used to it. While eating calmly, he was caught off guard when the king asked whether he would like to take a position in the government. Errol nearly choked on his biscuit, but quickly composed himself. The king said it might be early, but no one would object if Errol began working there. Then he asked which area interested him the most. Errol replied that he had no particular preference, but deep down, what he truly wanted was simply to rest. In this life, he only wanted to take it easy. He took a sip of tea to calm himself and told the king that there was no reason to think about positions right now, especially since he was busy with science and alchemy. With a serious expression, he waited, while the king remained silent. Deep down, Errol kept asking himself why the king was being so persistent about this, especially when the first prince did not even take part in government affairs. He also thought about the queen, and about how the firstborn had always been quiet. That made him remember how careful he was to never overstep his boundaries with them. He even felt lucky that the ball had been cancelled because of the eccentric prince's commotion. After all, being liked by the king was one thing, but having his trust to take on something truly important was an entirely different matter. Errol hated gossip and had no desire to get involved in sibling intrigues. That made him wonder whether the king was deliberately trying to create a rivalry between the two of them, because to him, survival was not just about being clever or strong. Leaving the palace to think things over, for the first time since leaving the concubine's palace, he went a bit farther out and rode on horseback. That alone made him feel good, this time riding a real horse. The ride began to excite him, and the wind against his face brought a sense of freedom he had not felt in a long time. After so much work and study, he remembered his other lives, when he traveled across different worlds simply to seek out powerful opponents. But now, just riding like this was enough to satisfy him. Suddenly, Kania asked him to slow down, surprised by how easily he handled the horse. Errol commented that the credit belonged to the horse, not to him. As they talked, Kania mentioned that she had not asked for so many guards to accompany them, but Errol replied that since she was a princess, security had to come first, even if it cost her a bit of freedom. Not long after, Errol began to feel a strange energy coming from ahead, heavy and mysterious. He stopped his horse, thinking it might be magic. Kania then asked why he had stopped, and he made up an excuse, saying that there might be monsters in the forest. Kania asked how he knew that, and Errol tried to improvise, claiming that he had a sixth sense for those things. In truth, this had started days earlier, while they were eating. Errol had mentioned that he had a strong sixth sense, and that something felt wrong ahead. Kania had not believed him, and had ridden straight toward the energy he was feeling. Desperate, Errol shouted for the knights to protect his sister, and one of them even thought to himself that the path they were taking led straight to the princess's training grounds. Surprised, Errol asked about that training field, but in the end, he simply followed Kania, who seemed to know exactly where she was going. Riding side by side, the two of them moved forward as she explained that traveling was like training, and training was like traveling. Everything was one great form of enjoyment. To Errol, however, it felt far more like punishment. She then commented that Errol would have come along no matter what, because he trusted her, and that she had already promised to protect him if any monsters appeared. That answer satisfied Errol, and he thought about how incredible she truly was. When they reached the training grounds, Errol immediately began laying out his strategies. He decided that the troops would drive the monsters in from one side, Kania would advance from the other, and the remaining forces would deal with any that fell into the trap. The plan was to conserve energy and allow Kania to display her talents. Soon, the training began. The guards released 20 orcs against her, and Kania, drawing her sword, charged straight at them, cutting down the first with a slash to the neck and, with another swift strike, sending the next one flying back. At first, Errol doubted that she would even manage to take down a single one, but as he watched, he was surprised by her strength and skill. It was impossible not to feel a bit of envy, but more than that, he was deeply impressed by his sister's composure and power. Kania did not stop, bringing down one orc after another. Her performance lifted even the guards' spirits, and they cheered for her. For a 16-year-old girl to display such incredible talent was truly impressive. The training continued for days, and she only kept demonstrating her abilities. At night, the two of them rested near the fireplace, and Errol asked why she still did not seem tired. Kania had always carried the feeling that she was not strong enough. She explained that, in order to protect the people she loved, she needed more power than anyone else. Errol listened carefully to every word and asked whether that meant she wanted to become the strongest person in the world. Kania shook her head and corrected him. It was not about being the most powerful, but about having enough strength to change the things around her. She knew that no one would truly support her simply because she was a princess, and many believed it was just a phase, that sooner or later she would give up the sword and marry a noble for political reasons. Errol understood this well, since arranged marriages were common in that world, especially for royal women, and Kania was already at the age where that was expected. Before Errol could say anything, she interrupted him, stating that she hated that kind of life. Errol was surprised by her response, and Kania went on to say that she admired him. He was there studying and earning respect through intelligence, while she was trying to stand out with the sword. The next day, Kania returned to the training grounds, and as if she were carrying bottled-up anger, she seemed driven by personal vengeance. When an orc charged at her, Kania sliced the goblin cleanly in half without hesitation, leaving everyone watching in shock. She continued hunting orcs, even as they made their way back toward the kingdom, as if she simply could not stop. Eventually, Errol commented that it was time to end the training, since there was nothing left for her to fight, and that they needed to return. Kania looked around and noticed a pile of goblins scattered across the area, then agreed to stop. At that moment, she realized her horse was completely exhausted. Errol suggested that she ride together with him on his horse, while hers would be taken by mages to receive magical treatment. Kania agreed, but insisted on holding the reins, since she rode better than he did. Errol did not mind at all, and so they continued their journey, accompanied by the guards. At first, everything seemed calm, but that feeling slowly began to change. Errol looked up at the sky and felt a bad omen creeping over him. Kania asked what was wrong, but Errol couldn't explain it. He only knew that something felt off. So he tried to rely on his sixth sense to understand what was happening. Suddenly, he realized the danger, a dragon. Errol pulled hard on the reins and told Kania to hold on tight. He shouted a warning to the guards behind them, telling them to run into the forest. The knights were caught completely off guard, because that area had been chosen specifically since the wyvern rider had assured them there were none nearby. But everything happened far too fast. An alarm began to blare, and almost instantly, a massive wyvern appeared behind one of the soldiers, snatching a guard like a toy and flying off with him. Panic spread instantly, because no one believed a wyvern could possibly be there. Errol stayed calm, trying to take control of the situation, while Kania looked back in terror at the horrifying scene. That was when they realized it wasn't just one wyvern, there were several. An entire swarm filled the sky, which made no sense, since wyverns were solitary creatures and never attacked in groups. So why was an organized force of them here? And they weren't hunting, they were slaughtering people. To make things worse, the wyverns began releasing acidic gas, turning the situation into pure chaos. The ground behind them became a battlefield. Kania was horrified as she watched the guards fall one by one, but Errol told her to focus and keep holding on to him. One of the wyverns locked onto them and began charging its acidic breath toward the two of them. That was when, out of nowhere, a mage appeared, hurling a fireball and blowing the wyvern apart in midair. The group of mages sprang into action, firing spell after spell to carve a path forward and protect the prince and princess. Even so, Errol knew the truth. They couldn't keep running forever. Wyverns were incredibly difficult enemies. Any attack below class 4 was useless, like throwing pebbles at a fortress. No matter how hard the mages pushed themselves, it was obvious they were reaching their limit. With 2 wyverns closing in fast, Errol didn't hesitate. He converted his mana into lethal projectiles and fired a precise shot, like a spiritual bullet. One monster was struck clean through the head, and the other dropped immediately after, without any struggle. Using this, he made it seem as if the mages were the ones casting those spells. Suddenly, a strange voice echoed inside his mind, sounding almost mocking. Errol scanned his surroundings, trying to pinpoint the source of the overwhelming sense of danger. Then, a man dressed in black appeared, holding a strange staff. He laughed, the kind of laugh you'd expect from a truly evil villain. Every instinct Errol had screamed that this man was a real threat. Before the mage could say a word, he launched an attack on the two of them. The assault caught Errol off guard. He had expected some kind of conversation before the fight, but he reacted quickly, dodging the attack and shielding Kania. Unfortunately, the guards behind him weren't as lucky. When the smoke finally cleared, Errol looked back and saw the fallen soldiers lying on the ground. Their bodies were still smoking from the power that had struck them. The mysterious mage commented in shock about how Kania had managed to survive. That startled Errol, because the enemy knew her name, making him suspect that she may have been the target all along. The mage raised his staff and declared that there was no escape, saying this was nothing more than entertainment for him. The dark energy pouring from the staff was suffocating, and as Kania looked around, she noticed something deeply wrong. The bodies on the ground began to move. One of the guards who was still alive screamed in terror, saying they were getting back up. Even Riven, who had already been defeated, started to stir, and the moment Errol saw that, he immediately understood the truth. They were facing the undead. The dark mage ordered the undead to attack Kania, declaring that he would show the royal family the true power of the Black Church. Suddenly, however, he stopped, as if he had sensed that something was wrong, even though he couldn't tell what it was. Errol, unwilling to stand still while his sister was in danger, decided to use the gift of Gong and unleashed a direct attack straight into the mage's chest. The impact was so powerful that the man screamed and was slammed to the ground. Kania, still confused, asked Errol what had just happened. Errol replied that the mage had likely overloaded himself with magic, causing a violent backlash inside his own body. Even with the mage defeated, the spell was still keeping the undead on their feet. The guards then told Errol and Kania to run, promising they would hold the monsters back. Before leaving, Errol told them he trusted them to finish the fight. He and his sister escaped into the forest, and when night fell, they took shelter beneath a cliff and set up camp there. With Kania still shaken, Errol tried to calm her down, explaining that without the mage, the undead wouldn't be able to stay active forever, since there was a limit to mana. As he prepared to light a fire, Kania asked how Errol knew how to do something like that, since he spent all his time in the castle. A little embarrassed, Errol explained that it was just a matter of rubbing 2 flammable materials together to generate heat, something simple. He added that if she hadn't been watching so closely, he would have just used mana to create the fire. After a few failed attempts, he finally managed to light the campfire, and Kania joked that maybe she should have skipped that particular training session. Errol made it clear that none of this was her fault. It had simply been an unexpected situation. She then asked if he had been scared during everything that happened. Errol hesitated, but chose to be honest. He said that members of the royal family had to hide their fear, even when they were terrified inside. He admitted that the Irvins had truly been frightening. Hearing that, Kania placed her hand on him and thanked him for staying by her side the entire time. Moved, Errol said he had known how scared she was from the very beginning, and that it broke his heart to see the guards die for nothing. He understood that the royal family would always be a target for assassins, but this was the first time Kania had ever faced real danger like that. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise coming from the sky. Riven and Griffo were fighting in midair. Startled, Kania wondered why they were battling at a moment like that, and Errol noticed a nest on the cliff. He realized Griffo's chick was there, and Riven managed to bite Griffo's neck, sending him crashing down onto the rocks below. Terrified, Errol and Kania ran to avoid the falling debris. When the dust finally settled, they saw the wyvern flying away, likely driven off by the scent of Griffo's blood. Errol looked around and noticed that Kania had moved closer to the fallen body. Worried, he told her to be careful, but she replied that it was fine, since the creature was already dead. Errol knew there was no stopping her curiosity. Kania stared at Griffo's body and wondered what they should do. Feeling uncomfortable, Errol asked if she wanted to bury him, but Kania surprised him by saying she was actually worried about the chick. Errol said there was nothing they could do and that nature had to follow its course, no matter how cruel it might be. Somehow, that was taken as a suggestion that the two of them should take care of the chick together, which only left Errol even more confused. Kania then spotted the guards approaching, and one of them immediately showed relief upon seeing them safe. When they reached them, she greeted the guards happily, glad to see them again. One of the guards reported that no one else had been injured after the undead spell was broken. However, everyone was shocked when they noticed that Kania was holding a small Griffo in her arms. Errol, feeling a bit nervous, thought this was the perfect moment to stop his sister from keeping the chick, but one of the guards commented that it was already far too late for that. A week later, everything seemed to have returned to normal, except for the family's newest addition, the little Griffo. That same night, Errol gave orders for the guards to take Kania away to rest, assuring them that he would personally take care of the body of the fallen adult Griffo. While the camp was being set up, the prince carefully used his sword to open the creature's chest and extract its magic core. He knew that this would help him tame the hatchling. Later on, back at the castle, Errol was playing with the baby Griffo, who seemed more energetic and lively the longer it stayed with them. As soon as Kania returned by carriage, she jumped down and ran over, only to be warmly greeted by the little creature, which already seemed attached to her. Meanwhile, Errol overheard rumors that a capture order had been spread throughout the kingdom. The Dark Church, the same organization responsible for the attack on Kania, had placed a massive bounty on anyone who could provide information about them. The prince remarked that the Dark Church wasn't the only threat facing the kingdom, and for a brief moment, he wondered if he was wasting too much energy thinking about wealth. One of the guards who overheard him asked what he meant by that, but Errol brushed it off, saying it was nothing important. A short while later, Kania, distracted while playing with Griffo, was interrupted when Errol called out to her. "Kania, did you feel that?" He was referring to a strange surge of mana that had suddenly appeared. She confirmed that she had felt it too, and he suggested they try again to see if the phenomenon would repeat itself. Curious, she agreed. The two of them prepared themselves, drew their swords, and began another duel. The clash of metal echoed through the area, sparks flying with every strike. After a final exchange, they both stepped back. Excited, Kania asked how she had done, and Errol told her that she had used aura. Privately, he was pleased. His plan had worked, and she truly believed in it. Kania asked if she could learn to use it as well and wanted to know where Errol had trained. He answered vaguely, saying that using aura depended more on the mind than on raw strength. A bit discouraged, Kania said that she might not be able to do it since she didn't think of herself as very smart. Errol corrected her, explaining that it wasn't about intelligence, but about control. She joked that that must be because he was a genius, but he assured her that with training, she would learn too. Growing more excited, Kania asked if she would be able to master aura quickly, and Errol confidently said yes, especially if she followed his method. What she didn't know was that he was subtly transferring mana, accelerating her progress. After that, he simply told her to focus and follow his instructions. Outside, one of the guards listened to their conversation from the shadows. Weeks passed. Whenever Kania appeared riding Fly, she trained swordsmanship and aura alongside Errol. To everyone's surprise, she became an aura user at an astonishing speed. One day, while admiring her sword, Kania asked if that was truly the power of aura. Errol congratulated her, but reminded her that this was only the beginning of her journey. An unexpected side effect of the training was the temporary growth of Fly, the young griffin. When exposed to the energy of aura, he would grow in size, often resting on Errol's shoulder, to the point where Errol even complained about the weight. Even after Fly returned to his normal size, Errol told Kania that this was only the first step. They needed to train more in order to learn how to control strength, movement, and fully harness the power of aura. He even imagined that one day Kania might be able to use aura while riding Fly. She laughed at the idea, thinking it was too bold, but Errol insisted that he was serious. While gently stroking the griffin, Kania asked if he truly believed that could happen. Errol answered that he did, and that the day would come sooner than she thought. Suddenly, the door opened, and a voice announced the arrival of His Majesty. Startled, Errol and Kania turned around, confused as to why the king was there, since he was supposed to be busy with matters in the north. The king entered accompanied by Lady Rafanna, and Errol hurried to greet them with respect. The king remarked that he had heard about their fencing training. The prince tried to downplay it, saying it was nothing serious. But the king, clearly pleased, stated that he wanted to personally follow Errol's growth in every field. At that moment, two servants entered, carrying a large chest. When it was opened, both Errol and Kania exchanged surprised glances at what lay inside. With a serious expression, the king asked Errol to try the sword. He explained that it was a special weapon, crafted specifically for him. Lady Rafanna strongly objected, saying that Errol was still far too young to wield something like that. But the king replied that he did not expect him to use it in combat yet. He only wanted Errol to touch it as its rightful owner. Errol took the sword casually, but shocked everyone when he actually tried to wield it. For a brief moment, he even wondered if it might be time to take swordsmanship more seriously. The king, encouraged by this sudden interest, considered that his son might have a hidden talent. That illusion, however, quickly shattered when Errol lost his balance and fell to the ground, sword and all. At that point, he decided it would be better to abandon the idea of becoming a swordsman in this lifetime. He already had talent in so many other areas, and learning to wield a sword would only drag him into the struggle for the throne. He needed to maintain the image of being the weaker brother. Still, not wanting to devalue his father's gift, Errol thanked him, but explained that swords were not meant for him. He then suggested that the blade be given to Kania instead, who possessed true talent and was improving rapidly, so much so that her skill was already making veteran knights reflect on their own careers. The king agreed, but with one condition. Kania would have to prove that she was worthy of the sword. The decision caught them both off guard. To Errol, it already sounded like a formal challenge. Kania, clearly nervous, began to panic, but Errol gave her a reassuring pat on the back and told her to show her father what she could do, and maybe even give the old man a beating. When the match began, the king immediately realized that her stance was not that of an ordinary knight. He could tell that Kania was using an advanced technique. She charged forward at high speed, driven by her physical strength and explosive mana. Watching closely, Errol wondered whether aiming straight for the head was really a good idea, especially when they were using real swords. The king, however, defended himself calmly and even smiled with confidence. To Kania's surprise, her father was using aura as well. With only a few movements, he deflected her strike and knocked her to the ground with ease. Even so, he was impressed. She had forced him to use aura at a level he hadn't even needed against knight captains. That realization made him reflect on the true power of the kingdom's army. Acknowledging his daughter's effort, the king commented that Errol had been her instructor and noted that his teaching method was different, since the traditional approach clearly hadn't worked. He then asked whether Errol could teach this method to other knights. Errol immediately understood that his father intended to create an unbeatable army of aura users, but he would never agree to that. He apologized and said it would be impossible, explaining that Kania's success came from her natural talent and the close time they had spent training together. That was the real reason behind her rapid progress. The truth was that no special method was required, only dedication and careful observation, and Errol had no desire whatsoever to spend his time surrounded by brutish knights. Months later, the king was still testing the so-called method on himself. Two maids witnessed the scene. The training hall lay in ruins, practice dummies split clean in half by the sheer power he had gained. He believed the training was effective, having even reached the final stage of an aura specialist. Unfortunately, Errol couldn't follow the same program because of his fragile body. The king believed that this was precisely why his son needed that kind of training the most. Determined, he decided to arrange something to protect him. Later, while having tea with Kania, Errol was shocked to hear that a personal guard would be assigned to him. Many people had volunteered for the position, and when he reviewed the applications, he realized that most of the candidates were well-known figures. Errol felt satisfied seeing how much his reputation had grown. He didn't think a bodyguard was truly necessary, but he didn't want to risk a repeat of what had happened before, nor did he want to reveal his powers. So he agreed to choose no more than 3 protectors. After reviewing the documents, he decided to conduct interviews, evaluating not only skill but also character and personality. And as someone educated and sharp-minded, Errol already knew his preference. He wanted women as his guards. While no one knew exactly what he was thinking, Errol decided to take action. He jumped onto the table and resolved to put his plan into motion. When the time for the interviews arrived, he began to wonder if he had gotten himself into something far more complicated than expected. The candidates were strong, true warriors, but they were nothing like the delicate figures he had imagined. Well, it wasn't their fault. Most of them had spent their entire lives training as knights. So Errol set aside his fantasies and began the interviews. He observed each candidate closely, analyzing their reasons for wanting the position. Many of them were so strong that they seemed capable of knocking him down effortlessly over and over again. One of them, in particular, had such an overwhelming presence that she made even the king seem like a lost child. As the selection progressed, a knight with a noble appearance caught his attention, as their aura felt different from the rest. Up to that point, everything was going smoothly. With that, Errol asked everyone to wait outside while he made his decision. Once the room was empty, Errol activated a chi technique that raised his ki to an extremely high level, like that of an ancient sage. Normally, mastering something like this would take decades, but Errol used it with the ease of someone who had lived many lifetimes. He planned to use this power to analyze the candidates more deeply. He called them back in one by one, and with his clairvoyance, he could see the color of their souls and their emotions. This allowed him to detect hidden intentions. Fortunately, none of them were planning to assassinate him, but a few harbored thoughts of espionage. Then, one candidate stepped inside. Her soul was so pure and crystal clear that it left Errol completely stunned. Her name was Asha Fornal, and at that moment, she seemed like the perfect, unbeatable choice. He still needed to select two more, so he also considered the muscular woman he had noticed earlier, since her soul was just as pure. Suddenly, another candidate entered. Her name was Siniger, the final applicant. Her energy was also clear and vibrant. As Errol reviewed her record, he noticed that she had served in several knightly orders across the kingdom and had even been sent to distant territories. Even so, based on her demeanor, she didn't seem to have done anything wrong, so he chose not to dwell on her frequent transfers. With that, Errol concluded the interviews and announced his choices, Asha and Sina. The two became his new personal guards and began working at the palace. Still, Errol wanted to test something. He took both of them to a secluded area and revealed his plan. He wanted them to demonstrate their abilities. After all, they would be his protectors, and he wanted them to be the very best. For that reason, he asked them to duel each other. They accepted immediately. To Errol, a fight between two warriors of similar level was the best way to see how far they could truly go. To make the competition even fiercer, he casually remarked that he was curious to know which of them was stronger. That single comment struck at their pride, since true knights live to prove their strength. The tension in the air grew heavier by the second, exactly as Errol had planned. He settled in comfortably, excited to watch what promised to be an epic clash. Before the fight began, the two asked if there were any rules. Ready and eager to win, they waited for instructions. Errol, casually eating popcorn, calmly told them they could do whatever they wanted, just not to go too far. With that, the two prepared for the duel. The tension was almost tangible, and Errol was certain he was about to witness a real battle. He clapped his hands, signaling the start of the fight. Right from the opening exchange, a single blow sent one of them flying, proving that asking them to hold back wouldn't mean much. That was simply how knights were. Now, all that remained was to observe the fight. Asha charged forward with her spear, and Sina responded with a wild strike, deflecting the weapon with a grin on her face. Seeing the perfect opening, Sina closed in to deliver a devastating punch, one that could have ended the fight far too early, since defending against it with a spear would have been difficult for Asha. Meanwhile, the imaginary narrator continued munching on popcorn, curious to see whether Asha still had a trick up her sleeve. Luckily, she did. With a swift kick, she knocked Sina's punch aside and forced her to retreat. Watching the exchange, Errol realized things were becoming too serious. He felt both of their auras rising and understood that if he didn't stop the fight soon, they might end up truly hurting each other. So he interrupted the duel and calmly explained what he had observed. Asha was impatient and relied too heavily on her speed, while Sina hesitated slightly, choosing to depend only on her fists. In the end, one was too fast and the other was too slow. Asha remembered how Errol had helped Keenan improve and quickly understood that the reason for this demonstration was the same: to help them grow. Rumors of how rapidly Keenan had progressed were already spreading among the knights, and now it was time for Errol's guards to follow that same path. And so, Errol began a special training regimen. In the first theoretical session, Errol introduced his own manual on mana. He explained its risks, the dangers of improper aura usage, and how to control it efficiently. He also suggested that the next step would be learning how to absorb mana from nature itself, stating that this would completely change the way they used aura from that point on. After the lesson, individual training began. With Sina, his goal was to help her focus her energy more precisely. Asha, on the other hand, was given the task of spreading aura throughout her entire body at the same time. She tried, but failed miserably. Errol explained that covering the whole body with aura wasn't impossible, but it drained energy extremely fast. That was why warriors usually concentrated aura in specific areas instead. He then told Sina that her biggest flaw was impatience. In close combat, charging in without thinking against a skilled opponent was a serious mistake. He instructed her to learn how to stay calm and ignore distractions, focusing only on building up energy and releasing it at the right moment. While the training continued, Queen Elia received a letter detailing Errol's activities. Up until then, she hadn't paid him much attention, considering him insignificant, but now that he was starting to stand out, she decided it was time to act. She burned the letter and resolved to take matters into her own hands. Back at the training grounds, Asha began to notice a difference in her strength after following the prince's instructions. Even after destroying nothing more than an unfortunate tree, she could already feel how much stronger she had become. That was when her past came to light. Asha was the daughter of the Fornelli family, a modest household from a rural region. When famine struck their land, monsters took advantage of their weakness, making the situation even worse. The aristocrats who once had ties to her family abandoned them completely. In the end, Asha joined the knights simply to survive. On the bright side, she had natural talent for combat and awakened her aura quickly, which eventually brought her to the capital. The downside was being assigned to one of the worst knightly orders imaginable, led by a captain who barely knew how to use aura and had only gained his position through political connections. Remembering that filled Asha with rage, so much that she wanted to turn her strength against him one day. She had applied to become a hero's guard out of desperation, but was accepted immediately. Now, in addition to helping her family live better thanks to the prince's support, her greatest goal was to save enough money to send her younger brother to the academy. Sina's past, however, was very different. She came from a family of mercenaries that had existed for generations and grew up in a tribe that wasn't tied to any nation. But after the war against the Empire 30 years earlier, mercenary life became increasingly difficult. That was when her family decided she should try to build a new life in the wider world. She accepted without complaint and began training as a knight. Her turning point came when she learned that her father had been murdered by a cruel feudal lord. From that moment on, her fury only continued to grow. Sina was never the patient type. She had even beaten fellow knights for mistreating villagers and felt no regret over it. On the contrary, she believed it was one of the best decisions she had ever made. After countless transfers, Sina was eventually sent to dangerous regions. Following this long journey, she decided to apply as a personal guard and was assigned to protect Errol. From the very beginning, she had a good feeling about working with him and was grateful for the opportunity. With all background checks completed, the two new guards officially began their duties. Errol wasn't particularly gifted in direct combat, but his ability to learn was absurd. Like a true strategist, he had brought wealth to the kingdom through inventions and business ventures, and had even helped Kenny awaken his aura using a theory of his own. Of course, rumors about him being a lazy young sage still circulated, but no one could deny his results. Meanwhile, during a meeting, the king and several officials discussed Errol's coming-of-age ceremony, as he would soon turn 14. One of the advisors suggested it would be a good opportunity to reward him, considering all the contributions he had made. He even mentioned the possibility of granting the prince a territory, and the king, catching the hidden intention behind the suggestion, became furious. He knew it was nothing more than an excuse to try to exile him from the capital. Errol's reputation had already crossed national borders, and in some countries people even speculated that the king might name him as the heir to the throne. Enraged, the king slammed his hand on the table, releasing his aura and making it clear that he had already chosen his successor, the legitimate crown prince. Moreover, he was certain that Errol had no interest whatsoever in the crown. Another official warned that the rumors were becoming dangerous and were diverting the people's attention away from the true heir. The duke tried to bring up something about the former king, but he was quickly interrupted. Soon after, a man entered the room carrying documents signed by several nobles. They all shared the same concern, the imbalance within the royal family. As he read through the petitions, the king realized they were all asking for the same thing. There was no way out. Errol would have to be exiled. Not long after, the young man received the news through a letter. He tossed the note aside without showing any emotion. Even though it was written politely, it was obvious they were casting him out. To his surprise, however, it was almost the best news he could have received. After all, having his own territory was something that genuinely excited him. For the first time, his abilities were being acknowledged. He didn't care about what the aristocrats thought. He was already imagining the fortress he would build with his own hands. His enthusiasm faded, however, when he discovered that the chosen destination was the northern territory of Philia, a land where snow fell year-round and the soil was so barren that nothing could grow. Even so, he decided he would depart 1 month after his coming-of-age ceremony. Errol also already knew that his alchemy team and a large portion of the workers would likely follow him. Sina, in particular, had been stationed in that region for over a year. She herself claimed that the cold there was unbearable. From the way she described it, Errol even thought they were talking about something close to Antarctica. It was the perfect gift from the aristocrats who hated him so much and were now exiling him. Even so, he found the idea less terrible than he had expected. After all, they could have sent him somewhere where surviving even a few seconds would be impossible. Compared to that, Philia didn't seem so bad. Later, Asha asked why Sina hadn't been completely honest. Her friend hesitated, but eventually admitted it. The place was truly cold, empty, and isolated. She confirmed that the only reason anyone stayed there was because monsters couldn't tolerate the climate, making the territory strategically valuable. Asha, although willing to follow Errol wherever he went, couldn't stop wondering if it was right to support him in such a difficult mission. Sina, on the other hand, saw no problem at all. She knew Errol well and trusted that he always had a plan. Since he showed no sign of despair, she believed everything would work out. Before leaving, each of them sent messages to their families. Errol knew his mother was heartbroken, even if she didn't say anything. He instructed the maids not to reveal his whereabouts, yet he still worried about her safety. If even a princess like Kania had already been the target of an ambush, his mother being alone could put her at risk. He thought about ways to stay in contact, but decided to leave that for later. For now, his focus was on planning the relocation. A hostile environment like Philia could be the perfect place for someone with his experience in reincarnations to live peacefully. That was when he summoned a mage. To his surprise, the one who appeared was Theon, accompanied by his disciples. Errol never expected to encounter someone so familiar at that moment. Even so, he asked that the matter be kept secret and handed over the blueprint of an item he wanted to create. The moment Theon looked at the design, he was stunned. It made him ask whether Errol himself had truly designed it, and indeed he had. Errol had only made a few adjustments to an artifact he had previously given to Kania, but those changes would allow the item to operate at twice the efficiency while costing 90% less to produce. This, of course, left Theon deeply impressed, and Errol asked whether he would be able to manufacture the item. Theon replied that he could, as long as he obtained the necessary materials, but explained that he knew the original creator of the design and didn't want to copy another person's work. Errol noticed his hesitation and decided to offer an incentive to ensure the result he wanted. He handed over several bags filled with money, and Theon's sense of morality disappeared instantly. Moments later, both he and his assistants began kneeling in front of Errol, not hesitating for a second before accepting the proposal. After witnessing the sheer power of money, Errol asked whether they could possibly finish everything in less than a month. He thought to himself that Theon could be an excellent candidate to become his personal mage, and to Errol's surprise, Theon delivered the finished necklace in just 10 days. Errol hadn't expected it to be completed so quickly, nor with such high quality in such a short amount of time, but he also noticed how exhausted the workers were. Pleased with the result, he suggested that they begin mass production right there in the kingdom. When Theon asked how many pieces would be needed, one of the workers silently hoped the number would be no more than 5. That hope vanished when Errol stated that he wanted 50 of them, and that would only be the beginning. Essentially, they would enter a rhythm that resembled slavery. Of course, it was brutal labor rather than actual slavery, since they would be paid. And even though Errol felt some sympathy for them, he knew the money would make it worthwhile. For the next step, Errol set out in a carriage with Asha. She grew curious about their destination and suggested that he could have sent someone else to handle the task. However, Errol replied that this time he wanted to go personally. He then revealed that their destination was the slave market. This left Asha shocked, making her wonder if power had finally gone to his head. Even so, Errol tried to calm her, explaining that there was a reason behind it. Asha imagined that perhaps he wanted to open farms or mines, but she soon realized that this wouldn't be Errol's way of doing things. Normally, a slave market would be a dreadful place, filled with suffering and despair. But to Errol's surprise, the location was well organized and remarkably clean. After all, it wouldn't be good if slaves caught diseases and passed them on to their owners. Soon, a man approached and introduced himself as Ian, the market's manager, warmly welcoming Errol. He guided him through the facility and explained that everything there was fully legal, and that the slaves were mostly people who hadn't paid their taxes or came from broken families. They didn't become slaves immediately. Rather, it was a way to avoid starving to death. There were criminals as well, but Ian assured Errol that he didn't need to concern himself with them. Eventually, Ian led Errol to his office and asked what he was looking for. Errol replied that he wanted to purchase 150 slaves, which surprised even Ian. Despite how large the request was, Ian guaranteed that it could be arranged, since he had affiliates in other cities. Errol requested that they be literate, preferably organized in groups of 4 or more, and that they be transported to a specific location. They finalized the deal using official documents, while the owner imagined the profits he would make. Everything was now proceeding according to Errol's plans, and he was immediately promoted to the highest client tier, a VIP client. On the way back, Asha, still curious, asked why Errol needed so many slaves, since owning hundreds of them wasn't something that could be done overnight under that tradition. Errol then explained that he intended to turn them into residents of his new territory. In addition, he planned to distribute his necklace to each of them and educate them for his future kingdom. Asha had never imagined that this was his true plan, and at last, she was able to let go of the uneasy feeling she had been carrying. Essentially, Errol wanted to transform an empty, lifeless land into the place of his dreams. But in reality, he simply wanted to create a comfortable environment for himself. All of his current efforts had a single purpose: to guarantee the laziest and most peaceful life possible in the future. At the same time, he wanted to take care of the people who would live in his new territory and create the greatest paradise the world had ever seen. The next day, Errol began thinking about everything he needed to do in order to achieve this new goal, as well as the farewells he would have to make to the people he loved. At that moment, his mother knocked on the door and came in to hug Errol, asking him to try once again to speak with the king about such a drastic change. Errol, however, told her not to worry and promised that he would always visit her whenever he could. Even though there was still a year left before his departure, she remained saddened by the thought of seeing him leave. Soon after, a maid appeared to escort him away, and Errol began to think that he did not intend to reveal where he would be staying until the place was fully established. That way, he could reassure his mother once it was truly safe. Everything seemed calm that afternoon until, suddenly, a knight was sent flying through the air. The other knights trembled in fear when they saw who was responsible. It was Kenya, completely furious. She called out to the next one, demanding that he fight her with everything he had, or he would not live to see the sunrise. Her anger came mainly from the fact that Errol had been sent away. She understood the situation, but she simply could not stop herself from being upset to that extent. What bothered her the most was that Errol hadn't told her anything over the past 6 months. Thinking about that, she effortlessly slammed another knight into the wall. Kenya believed he had remained silent because he couldn't change his fate, but the truth was that Errol had simply forgotten to tell her. Even so, she had no intention of letting him leave so easily, and the knights remained utterly terrified by the pressure of Kenya's aura. According to Errol's manual, the flow of mana accelerates when someone experiences intense emotions. Because of that, Kenya became the youngest swordswoman in the kingdom's history and the third youngest and strongest in the world. All of it was driven by the anger caused by Errol's situation. Errol even remembered his first life, when he had been in military service, and how that life had ended so quickly in war. It was one of the experiences that made him want to live in a completely relaxed way. Now, at last, he turned 14, and his coming-of-age ceremony began. He was greeted by many nobles, but the entire event left him bored. There were even more aristocrats than at his first birthday, and back then he could pretend to be sleeping like a baby, but now there was no way to escape. He was certain that all of those nobles were delighted that he was being driven out of the kingdom. So who truly cared about his future? One of the nobles, a leading figure among the aristocracy, began to irritate him deeply, filling Errol with the urge to destroy the entire place. However, knowing that his mother was there, he restrained himself and ignored everything that was happening. Soon after, the primary queen approached to greet him, pointedly emphasizing that he would soon be heading to another territory. Naturally, her intention was to provoke him, but Errol replied calmly and politely, saying that it would have happened eventually no matter what. He then chose to see it as an opportunity to serve the kingdom sooner rather than later. With a sly smile, she remarked that her son's abilities had improved thanks to Errol and, shortly after, handed him a fox fur coat as if it were a gift. In that instant, Errol immediately realized who was truly behind his exile. He concluded that the queen's son would have had no political motivation for such a move, which meant it could only have been an order from the primary queen herself, since she was the only one capable of gathering all the necessary approvals from the nobles. That led him to suspect that the gift was nothing more than a way to mock him. Even so, he had to remain calm for his mother's sake, because otherwise everything could easily get worse. So he forced a polite smile, saying that he had already said his farewells to his brother and that he would always come to his aid whenever necessary. After all, they shared the same royal blood. On the surface, the conversation appeared friendly, but inwardly, Errol didn't care in the slightest and was already planning how to make her pay for it. Even so, the two of them continued to conceal the hatred they felt toward each other, exchanging hollow laughter. As the banquet drew to a close, Errol began to feel like he was forgetting something. He then looked toward Kania and noticed that she was strangely quiet. He assumed she was angry because he had told her so late about his departure and decided to apologize. However, Kania acted first, and Errol sensed from her presence that something was about to happen. When she stood up, Errol felt an unsettling premonition that it would not end well. Kania then walked up to her father and declared that she would accompany Errol to Philia. The entire crowd fell silent, and Errol realized that, with those words, she had ruined the entire ceremony. Errol expected Kania's mother to intervene, but she seemed unconcerned and even appeared to agree with her daughter. The king became furious at Kania's behavior and demanded to know what she intended to do after this. Errol knew it had been a risky move, because she would not back down even in front of the king. Even so, he wondered why Kania was so determined to follow him. Then Kania announced that she wished to become Errol's knight, leaving even him completely confused. The king was also surprised by his daughter's newfound ambition and remarked that becoming a knight was not something easily achieved. But Kania remained confident, because she had already reached the rank of master.